Time savers? Yeah, right. Welcome to Dorrs Down. The theme of our podcast is time. Inextricably linked to the human condition, time weaves through the fabric of our lives. Saving time is on our minds. But can we?
I'd pay to save time. In fact, I do. Amazon Prime. I want my book tomorrow. Or car washes. We have unlimited car washes.
Now, wait a second. Amazon Prime, you want your book tomorrow, but how does that save time? Sounds like you're taking more time to get your book than it would be to just...
wait. I don't have to wait too long for it to come.
You don't have to wait too long. You just have to wait in a whole extra day.
Well, yeah.
How is that saving time that you get a book a day later instead of just going to Barnes & Noble and getting it right now?
I could go to Barnes & Noble and get it, but if I ordered it from Amazon and I didn't have Amazon Prime, I might have to wait 3 or 4 days.
Or you could say that instead of driving a car and going down and finding a store and walking up and down aisles and all that kind of stuff.
But I love to do that.
That takes all kinds of time too.
That's true. It does.
The bottom line here is that when you say that you're saving time, we're still spending time, right?
Everything takes time. But some people pay to save time. Like, we don't do this because we really don't fly that much and we really don't care. But a lot of people will pay for pre-boarding. They'll pay a premium price, or they'll pay something to go through the security at the airport quicker. So I think what happens is that saving time is something you pay for if you want it.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I also think that when you're talking about saving time, now, first off, I don't think that anybody can actually save time, but we'll get to that in a minute. What I'm thinking, though, is that even in the context of what everybody calls saving time, which, again, I'm not subscribing to it, but I'm just trying to empathize here a little. I think that when people are thinking of saving time, I think that they're trying to imagine that if they can put more events, if they can put more activity into a certain amount of time, then they're saving time. So if you could do 2 or 3 things at once or something, then that...
And maybe it makes them feel better because they think they're saving time.
Yeah.
But the truth really is...
But ultimately, it's really a perspective thing, because like we were talking about you going to Costco, and you were saying that you don't like going to Costco because it's a big waste of time because there's so many people there and there's long lines at the cash registers and the parking lot is full of people, all of that. So I get that, but at the same time, it's kind of nice to go to Costco because you can buy in quantity big bulk items and you bring them home and you don't have to go out shopping anywhere for another month or so. And that saves time, doesn't it?
Well...
So it depends on how you're looking at it. Time, a lot of people think that time, people say, do you remember that time that we went sledding down the hill?
Yeah.
Or do you remember that time that we did this or did that?
Yes, they do.
And time, it's not time. It's an event. Do you remember sledding?
Mm-hmm.
But to say remember that time, it's like, well, not really. It wasn't a time that's sort of a weird way to measure events, is with time.
Yeah, so time, I think there's different meanings of time.
Anyway, yeah, that's kind of the point I'm making, is that time in its purest form
is time. Tick, 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 and you can't stop the tick. You cannot do it.
Nobody can stop it. Nobody can slow it down. Nobody can affect it at all. It just keeps going.
So you really can't technically save it. You can't save time.
You can't. If only you could take a bunch of seconds.
But I think I can.
You think you can save time? Yeah. So tell me how you save time, because I'd like to know. How does anybody save time?
Well,
but go ahead.
Like, I line up like... what's the word? I've lost the word. I line up like actions and do them all at once. So, like, now I create a bunch of social media posts at one time, like for a whole month. I just sit down and I just create a bunch of social media posts. And I think I can create the subsequent ones quicker because I'm kind of in the in the mood of creating them rather than starting a task that maybe takes 5 or 10 minutes and then the next day coming back and doing that 5 or 10 minute task and doing it every day. I think I save time by doing a whole group of them at once.
Well, do you think that the time that you're supposedly saving by doing more activities in the same amount of time, which is an efficiency thing, not saving time, but anyway, do you think that that is valuable?
Well, it's valuable to me because I get more done.
Well, when I ask you if it's valuable, what I'm asking is in terms of dollars, are you making more money because you're getting more activities done
Well, it
in the same
depends
amount of
on what
time?
I'm doing, but perhaps because, like, when I talk about social media, that's marketing. So that's my marketing. And who knows where the magic formula is? The last week or two, I've gotten like several new subscribers every day to my newsletter. I don't know what's happening out there. And I've been invited to podcasts and who knows what the magic thing is that did it. But I do a lot of stuff to get my name out there. And so I don't know, maybe
Well,
it works.
you of all people, you do have a massive agenda. You're always, 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 always just pushing to get things done. You're always
Yes.
you don't even pause long enough to look at the thing that you just achieved
Oh, I
and
do
and enjoy
sometimes.
it. Enjoy
Like,
the
I just made some welcome videos for the 3 digital courses I'm creating.
yeah.
And I've stopped and watched those videos several times each day just because they make me happy. And they're only 1 minute long. So I can watch them and it doesn't really slow me down for my other work that I'm trying to do. So I've appreciated those.
Okay. That's better than I usually hear you do, because
Yes.
usually, the second that the paint is on the wall, you're like, well, okay, now let's get the paint on the ceiling. It's like,
Yes.
stop, just chill for a second, just enjoy this.
Yeah, you kind of do this thing. When we were working on our building in Sedalia, you do a task, like a big task, like I'm talking cutting and pointing a whole brick wall.
Yeah.
And then when it was done, you'd just stand there and stare at it for like hours, just looking at your wall that you cut and pointed.
I don't know if I went all the way into hours, but I did enjoy just looking at
Yeah,
the work that I'd done. I
yeah,
did a lot of work in that building.
you did. It was
Um,
fun.
So there's this phrase, and I've heard it a bunch of times, and I never really understood until tonight's podcast. We were doing some research on
Mm-hmm.
this, and there's a phrase called that everybody's heard, and it's time is money.
Yes.
And time is money is an interesting phrase because I didn't know it's called an aphorism, which is a little bit different than a catchphrase, or there's like a half a dozen different things, but this aphorism is a little more serious.
I've never heard that word before.
It's got a little more bite to it than like an adage. An
Huh.
adage is sort of light and fluffy, and an aphorism is something that's really pretty heavy. It's serious.
Oh.
And so that's what the difference is between those. But
Okay.
anyway, it's an aphorism. And I thought it was interesting because I just learned tonight that Benjamin Franklin was the author of it.
Oh, that doesn't surprise
He
me.
wrote a paper back in, I don't know, what was it?
1748.
1748. So he wrote a paper a long time ago, and we're still talking about it. Time is money. And I just, in a way, I think that's pretty fascinating because you have to think with an abstract mind to relate time to money. But the older I get, the more I realize that time is more and more and more valuable, and money is less and less valuable. Money doesn't, you can't take it with you. So
You can't take it with you. That's true.
yeah, you can't take it. You can't take anything with you. You came in with nothing, and you go out with nothing.
Gosh, that's right, Chris. You can't take one single thing, not a favorite shell or a favorite rock or even a favorite feather.
You can't even take a memory with you.
Oh, yes. Yes, you can.
You think?
I think in heaven you have all your memories.
Oh, you think so?
I think so because you get to go up there and like have a party with all the people that are up there before you that you miss. And it's like a celebration. So
I-
you have your memories.
I think when you heaven is just our spirit just gets sucked back into the divine ethos
No, no. I
of
get to see
God,
my mom
and
again and
you
my
just feel
dogs.
warm and fuzzy. And
Checkers will be waiting and Domino.
you think
Yeah.
so?
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. You know how I know that?
Uh,
It's a fact.
it's a fact.
It's a fact because heaven couldn't be heaven for me if there weren't any dogs in it. So, since heaven is supposed to be like everything you ever wanted, there'll be dogs there and cats.
So
Couple grumpy
you think that
cats.
heaven is going to be whatever you deem it to be?
Whatever it needs to be for you. I think we're all different.
Oh, oh, so my heaven could be one where I don't have any. There's no thought
You
process
might just
or.
be stuck there with a chessboard.
Oh, that's heaven.
Yeah, that's the opposite.
That
of
that I gotta
heaven.
tell you, Toby, if I'm in heaven with the chessboard for eternity, that would be hellish.
Won't you miss me if you don't have me there?
Well, if I have a chessboard, nobody will be there.
That's right, because we'll all leave you.
Yeah, 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 like you do now. All right. So anyway, where are we?
Well, you were telling me earlier that um, the reason that Benjamin Franklin wrote that time is money is because he was trying to show a monetary cost of laziness, meaning if you waste your time,
Ah,
there's
oh,
a
that's right.
price you pay for
Which
being lazy.
when you go to economics
Mm-hmm.
in college, they call it opportunity cost.
Uh,
That you can't do two things at one time. It's impossible.
I can. Right now, I'm talking to you and I'm putting on chapstick.
Yeah, but you're not really achieving anything in either one of those
I am.
situations.
My lips feel good now.
Oh, great. So anyway, opportunity cost is you can't run a factory and write a book at the same time.
Well, I think I could try.
Anybody could try, but you won't do either one of them very well
That's
because
true. I
you
agree with that. You wouldn't do them very well.
yeah, because when you multitasking is also an untruth. I
It's
mean,
one.
that's my own feeling
It's one
about
of
it, but
my super skills. My
super skills, yeah,
superpower,
superpower, yeah,
multitasking. Mm-hmm.
superpower,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, along with saving time. Yes, right, yeah, like when there's a bunch of stuff over there on the desk and you move it over to there on the table so that you can take all that stuff that's off the table and you put it over on that shelf, and then you put the stuff that was on the shelf, you have to move that somewhere, and so you put it up on top of the refrigerator.
Well, that's
And when
right.
you're done, after you've moved everything around the room in 6 different locations, we have lots of extra space.
That's right. Just like I can have extra time.
Just like you can have extra time
That's
by
right.
by just miraculously.
Mm-hmm.
I What is it that you do to save time now? Oh, you
I
multitask. That's it. You
yes,
multitask.
that's right.
Multitasking is what saves you time.
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
and I also combine
Sure it
like
is.
tasks and do them all at once.
Yeah.
If it's something I need to do daily, then I do them all and save them and publish them so that they happen daily without me doing it daily.
All right. So what's your
S-
most recent news article?
Oh, so this one was interesting. Remember Robert Roberson? We
No.
talked about him earlier. He's the one who was going to be executed, and then the state um, council or something, they didn't want him to be executed. They believe he's innocent. Well, um, so that case is kind of back in the news, but it's really because it's about this other woman whose name is Suzanne Johnson. So Suzanne Johnson was also convicted of shaken baby syndrome, which is what Robert Roberson was convicted of. Shaken baby syndrome was something that was kind of in vogue in the 80s. It was this new method of killing a baby, and everybody wanted to prosecute it. So there was a bunch
A
of,
new method of killing a baby?
well, a new prosecution, a new prosecutorial term, shaken baby syndrome. So they put a title on it and they made it a crime. And so they were just really eager to convict a bunch of people of shaken baby
That's
syndrome.
weird. That doesn't sound like a syndrome at all. It
It's
sounds
not, but
it
that's what they call
sounds
it.
like a crime. Shaking a
It,
baby is a
yeah,
crime.
yeah.
It,
But also, what happened back then was that all these markers that they use to say this was shaken baby syndrome, it has now been proven that there's dozens of other things that cause the very same autopsy results as what they deemed to be shaken baby syndrome. So now there's a whole lot of cases that were convicted of shaken baby syndrome, and now they're realizing that it wasn't shaken baby at all. So that's what happened with this one particular case. Suzanne Johnson spent more than 2 decades in prison for the death of a child by shaken baby syndrome before scientific advances disproved the diagnosis. 4 years after her conviction was overturned, now she's horrified to see that the state of Texas is prepared to execute a man for the same offense. So Suzanne Johnson is now 80 years old. She spent 20 years in prison. She was convicted of assault on a child causing death after Jasmine, a 6-year-old little girl, died on her watch at a daycare center in Southern California in 1997. Johnson said Jasmine had fallen from a high chair, but prosecutors convinced a jury that the baby was killed by deliberate abuse, resulting in the shaken baby syndrome classification, which is SBS. But in April of 2020, 21 years into a life sentence, Johnson was granted clemency after pediatric pathologists dismantled the evidence that led to her conviction, casting doubt on the reliability of the shaken baby syndrome diagnosis as a whole. So now Suzanne Johnson has started a big movement to get Robert Roberson off of death row. So, they saved him once. That was back in August or September when we first started doing this podcast. But he's still on death row, so they could schedule it again. And so now she has jumped into the fray and is really pushing for Robert Roberson's release. So I thought that was an interesting case because it kind of brings up something we've already covered, but with a more current taste to it.
I can't help but think that, they can go and do scientific studies and put other things together and come up with other reasons why a baby would die besides shaken baby syndrome. However, on my own I remember when Kevin, my son, was maybe, 3 or 4 years old. He was just a little kid. And I remember we bought a brand new dining room table. And Kevin took a pen or a pencil or something, and he wasn't doing anything on purpose. He was too young to know whether it was right or wrong anyway, but it was a brand new table that I paid a lot of money for. And when I was in my early 20s, to buy a table for $700 was absolutely ridiculously expensive for me.
Yeah,
I just didn't have that kind of money. And he had paper on the table, but he was writing on the paper, and he was pressing so hard on the paper that it kind of etched letters in the top of the finish on the table.
Right.
And I beat him.
Ooh.
I beat him. I didn't. There was no shaken baby in it, but there was. But I beat him. And after I beat him, I cooled off, and I realized that I had overreacted. That the table is not that important.
Yeah.
The money was not that important. It wasn't that important before. It wasn't that important after, and it's certainly not that important today. But at that time, I apologized to him. I don't even know if he was old enough to even understand what was taking place, but I apologized to him, and I never did it again.
Yeah.
Not once. I had never lifted a hand against that kid.
Well, I think it is true that parents can lose their cool and overreact.
If I can lose my cool and do what I did to Kevin that day, which was just a severe spanking, I think that there's an awful lot of parents out there that can get really frustrated and get to the point where they snap.
I'm not saying that no babies die because their parents have shaken them. I'm not saying that.
I don't know if there's any worse crime than that.
I don't either. But I'm saying I think that prosecutors were zealous in the prosecution of it when they first identified it as something, put a name to it.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, they were zealously prosecuting that.
Yeah.
And there are probably many instances where they convicted someone who really didn't shake their child or
Mm.
didn't cause this death, that there were other reasons for it. And they just didn't even look at them because they were so convinced about this new theory of shaken baby syndrome.
Mm.
So I think that's kind of interesting. That's, you know, I don't know. I think we need to prosecute people because we're trying to make the world a safer place, not just prosecute people because now we have this new crime we're going to really go after. It just doesn't make sense.
When you save time, what is the container you put the extra seconds into?
Chris,
And where did you buy it? Because I'd like to have one.
I could get you one. I got one for you right here. And there's actually a story behind this. So look at that mason jar.
That's not a mason jar. It's a mason's jar. It has an
Oh.
apostrophe S on it.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
With a patent of November 30th, 1858.
That jar is 100 years older than me. 100 years older than me. And do you know where it came from? Chris, do you remember where this jar came from?
No.
There was some guy who came into our building in Sedalia, and I can't remember his name.
Yeah. Now
But you helped him with
Yeah,
something. He
yeah.
was he'd gotten out of prison and he was doing quite well, but he had something he needed help with. And you helped him with it. And
he had about a half a dozen of these jars.
3 months later, he walked into our shop and he said, "Here you go. I wanted to give you something to thank you."
Yeah.
And so that jar has moved with us everywhere we went. And there's been a couple times when you've said, "Why are we bringing this jar?" And it's like, because that guy gave it to us. And you're like, "Oh yeah, that's right."
Yeah.
So there you go. That
Yeah.
looks like a perfect jar to save time. And that's where I'm going to put my extra time.
So if you can just imagine putting a bunch of seconds in here, if you could
Let's
fill
see.
it with some seconds. See the seconds that are in there?
I see them.
Yeah, it looks pretty empty.
They're
to me,
all
but-
in there because of the way that I multitask.
And then you put the lid on it and
Mm-hmm.
you screw it on tight, and now we've got seconds in this jar that we can later on
we
open
can
this
take
and
them
just
out
use
and
them.
use them.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
You realize that this is all a bunch of horse doo-doo.
Well, it looks
right?
like an empty jar, but I like the idea.
Yeah. So anyway, saving time is that's something that I wish that we could do.
Yeah.
I wish you could just scoop up a bunch of it and put it in a jar and use it later.
Yeah, so I suppose you're probably right. You can't save time. But I can combine similar tasks into one effort and use less of my most precious resource because, time always runs out.
Here we are at our favorite part of the episode, felony murder, inspired by John Maynard.
Yep.
So what is felony murder?
It's a loophole.
Yeah, I heard somebody mention a loophole is it's an error in a contract.
An error in a contract. Wow.
Which is kind of interesting because it sort of explains. So loopholes are in the tax law, and loopholes this felony murder is a loophole. It's an error. It shouldn't be in law at all. It shouldn't allow prosecutors to convict somebody of murder when they didn't commit a murder.
That's true.
Charge them with the crime that they committed, even if it's a felony, whatever that is. But it should not include murder if they didn't kill anyone.
Which, by the way, since we're talking about felony murder, today I did an interview on a podcast for Fox, True Crime,
Yeah.
with
Emily Campagna.
Campagna. I did that. I was asked to do that podcast. So I was in the middle of a podcast, and you came in and you looked and said, "Well, she looks familiar."
Yeah.
And
And I said, "What's your name?" And she was like, "Emily." And she's asking you. So Toby, what's that statement that you just made? Let's get that down on record. And I was like, Emily what? And she's like, "So Toby, what have you got?" And I was like, "Emily, is that Emily Campagno?" And she's like, "Well, yeah, but Toby, you got
right.
this." And I was like, "Emily Campagno, the celebrity from Fox News, that's you?" And she was like, "So anyway, Toby, hurry up with that."
Yes, because she was on a schedule. But here's the thing that I wanted to bring up. during this podcast interview, she asked what I was doing now, and I was telling her about our podcast.
Right.
And I was explaining to her felony murder and what
How
it
you worked.
was and how it was so unfair and it was a loophole, and she was just nodding her head. And then when you told me who she was and that she was this big person at Fox News, I went and looked her up on the internet. She's an attorney. She's a defense attorney, and then she was a judge in an appellate court. And here I was explaining felony murder to her as if she didn't know what I was talking about. And I felt like such a fool.
This woman on Fox News is so brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Her presence in front of the camera and her composure
Mm-hmm.
is world class.
Yes.
She pronounces every syllable perfectly. She never says and it doesn't matter how complex the issue is. She could be talking about how Donald Trump was running an election and Joe Biden did this, that, and the other thing, and she just streams through all kinds of stuff, and she can lay it all out so quickly and so efficiently, and she saves time by doing that.
She does.
Yes.
She does.
Yeah.
And she stays on time, I could tell, because we definitely had a time frame.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
But-
very professional.
Yes, she was.
Extremely
She
well.
was. And I really enjoyed the podcast.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to see it. Anyway, I have an interesting case for you because actually this weekend I also talked to an NPR
Oh, wait a second.
producer.
Before you change the subject,
Mhm.
do you have any idea when you're going to be on Emily Campagno's?
No, I don't.
And what's the name of that podcast?
It's called
Fox
Fox
News
News True Crime Podcast with Emily
Campagno.
Campagno. That's what it's called.
And so Fox News True Crime Podcast.
Yes, that's right.
True Crime Podcast
That's right.
on Fox News.
Yeah.
Emily Campagno. Okay, so
Yeah.
what's the next one?
So this was interesting because I also talked to an NPR producer this weekend who wants to have me on his podcast. And I started telling him about felony murder. And he's like, I know. I already know. He said, have you heard about Jen Angel? And I was like, I thought it was like generation. Because, they got all these millennials and Gen X and Gen Y. And I just thought Jen Angel was another group of people.
I think it's great that in this last, I don't know what's going on, but in this
I
last
don't
couple
either.
of weeks that all of a sudden it seems like you're just getting some traction. You've
I
been
really
you've
am.
been working and working and
Yes.
working nonstop for years.
Uh-huh.
And just in the last week or so, I mean, when NPR is no joke.
No, they're not.
That's National Public
Yeah,
Radio. That's a
yeah.
big platform.
I forgot he told me, and I wrote it over there.
It's like a couple of million
2 million hits
people a
per
week.
week. Something.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really like this guy, Bo Nash. But he was telling me, have you heard of Jen Angel? And I said, I didn't know what it was. I thought he was talking about like Generation X or Generation Y, and now there's a Jen Angel. But he started telling me that, and let me tell you this story.
But
So
the
I went
Jen
up-
Angel is a name of a person.
Yes. So
Right,
I went
okay.
up and looked out this story, and it's fascinating. So I don't know what year this happened, but on February 6th, it probably was last February 6th because it's a fairly new case. There's a woman named Jen. I guess her name is Jennifer, but she goes by Jen, and her last name is Angel. So Jen Angel lived in Oakland, and she had a bakery there that was called Angel Cupcakes or something like that. Anyway, she was robbed in her car on February 6th in Oakland. And there was these robberies going on where these people would watch women get into their cars and then they'd open their car door and grab the woman's purse and run off. But she tried to retrieve her purse. So she chased after the perpetrator's vehicle and she got caught in the car door of the perpetrator. And Birch, who was the person driving the car.
Okay, now hold on a second here because I'm a bit confused.
Okay.
Jen Angel,
Mm-hmm.
this story says that she was robbed in her car.
Yes.
And so somebody took her purse and then what? Left her car and went and got in their own car and
they
started
weren't
driving
in
away?
her car. I said this earlier. You weren't listening. They had these robberies going on where they would watch women get into their cars alone.
Yeah.
And then these criminals would open their car door and steal the woman's purse and take off running. That was their MO. So she got into her car, put her purse on the passenger seat. They opened the car door and grabbed her purse and took off running.
You mean the criminals opened the Jen's car door
Yes.
and grabbed her purse and
Yes.
took off running?
Yes, to their vehicle, which was parked
Oh,
down
so
the
they
street.
did run to their own vehicle and get in
Yes.
their own vehicle and
Yes.
take off. And she
Yes.
chased after
She
them on
chased
foot.
after them.
On foot.
Yes.
And caught up to them when they were getting in their own car
Yes.
and tried to retrieve her purse by reaching through the window or
Yes.
whatever. And then as they took off, driving away, they drug her like 50
Yes,
feet.
they
And she fell
right,
out of the car and
right.
probably scrapped herself, but she hit herself in the head.
Well, I don't know what
falling out of the
she
car.
did, but they dragged her more than 50 feet.
Yeah.
And she died in the hospital 3 days later from blunt force trauma to the head.
Right.
But
Which
here's
maybe she was even run over or something or smashed
Perhaps.
against the car. But cars are big, powerful machines.
they are
They're-
5,000 pounds.
Yeah, they are deadly for sure if you're not in the right position. on
So
'em.
here was the deal. Jen Angel was this advocate who wanted to make a difference. She was a steadfast opponent of policing and prisons, and she routinely attended protests and gave cupcakes to those in need. That was her business, Angel's Cupcakes. So she actually knew about felony murder and believed it was wrong, and she set up an estate for herself if something should happen to her. And in that, she said, if I should ever get killed in an accident where it was not an intentional act, I don't want the person to be convicted of felony murder. Can you believe that?
No, I don't.
Well, it's true. She was a steadfast opponent. So
Oh, I can believe that she was a steadfast opponent of felony murder. I can believe all that. It seems way, way wacky to think that somebody that was an opponent of felony murder would write it into her will that she doesn't want anybody that commits a crime against her that's committing
that wasn't
a felony.
intentional,
That
you know.
wasn't intentional,
Right.
and my
To
my
be
life
convicted of
ends
felony
because of
murder.
it. That
Yeah.
they should not be held accountable by felony murder.
That's right.
And
Well, I'm doing some research into this. So, but this is what I was told by Bo.
Okay.
So I'm still doing some research, but I wanted to bring up her case. So her friends have approached the prosecutors and said Jen would not want this man who was only 18 at the time of the crime to be convicted of murder and put into prison for life. She would not want that, and we should honor her wishes. And so they actually gave a statement that said, we're committed to carrying out Jen's legacy and the vision of the world that she pushed every day to create in her daily life. And we know that does not involve moving towards punishment and harm and retrenching racist and damaging practices. We're eager for the district attorney to take that seriously and move toward potential opportunities for restorative justice. So, you know, I find that to be fascinating, actually. So they go on to say the formation of Angel's estate was just one example of her knack for organizing and intentional decision making. She handpicked and routinely updated members of her estate and their roles in case something unexpected happened to her. So,
okay. So I want to throw in a couple of things here. Is that I hope by this time anybody that's been following along with our podcast, I hope by this time people realize that I'm not a social justice warrior.
I am.
You maybe, I'm not. I'm just too conservative for that. And I have a more realistic, I just think that people should be held accountable. Now, I'm not saying
I think they should be held accountable, but I don't think it needs to be over accountable. I don't think life in prison is appropriate for an 18-year-old that had no intent
I agree
to
with that.
hurt someone.
I think that the law should be fair.
I think they should.
And I
too.
think that the law is fair for most things. I don't think that felony murder is fair.
No, it's not.
I don't think that that's fair at all. It's
No.
just too many instances where people get life sentences or the death sentence when they didn't kill anybody.
Right.
And
I agree.
I don't agree with that. So I'm not a social justice warrior. However, at the same time, there are some cases that are really kind of off. And I feel like this is one of those cases where somebody wanted to steal a purse and they drove away with somebody's purse, a victim's purse. And that victim was not going to just let her purse ride away in somebody else's car. So she chased after them and she winds up dead. And that turns this whole thing into not just a felony. It's not just this crime that was committed that's a serious crime that they should be charged for the felony. But because somebody winds up dead, they wind up getting a life sentence for the death of that person.
Yes.
You know, for the murder of that person. And that's wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree with that.
I find this whole case very interesting. And here's the really interesting part. Her fiance was previously incarcerated and is now a defense attorney. He got out of prison and he went to law school and he became a defense attorney, and he's making a difference in the world. And I actually reached out to him and connected with him, and he's willing to come and talk on our podcast about felony murder. So I think we're going to try to set that up. And here's the interesting thing that I just love. His name is Ocean Motley, and her name is Jen Angel. And I just love their names. Their names are so unique.
Okay. Cool that they have cool names and you like that, but that's getting off track.
It is.
So here's the thing. I was just thinking that people that are felons, no, not just people that are felons, people, period. It doesn't matter whether they're felons or attorneys. It doesn't matter if they're politicians or grave diggers. It just doesn't matter what people's career path or whatever it is that they do in life, or even homeless people for that matter. People, I believe that water finds its own level.
Yeah.
And so when somebody goes and commits some sort of a crime and they get busted for it and they go to prison, there's not very many people that go to prison and have a felony conviction that when they're done paying their dues to society, their debt to society, that they would come off and become a published author like you.
Well, yeah.
And get master's degrees. There's not many people that would go on and become an attorney and be a defense attorney because they know that the law is kind of screwed up and it convicts people that shouldn't be convicted.
Right.
There are people that go to prison and come out and really make a difference in the world.
They do.
Now, I think that probably most people that go to prison, they go there because they're just not there.
Here's a really interesting fact that Emily shared with me today.
Okay.
During my podcast with her. She said, statistically, the recidivism rate is off the charts, something like 90%. But
again, water finds its own level.
But listen, of inmates who were involved in a prison dog program across the whole country, the recidivism rate is 0.
Wow. Interesting.
And I think that shows that all you need to do is to offer the inmates something that lets them value themselves, and they will become valuable members of society. They'll become people who, want to make a difference in the world, who want to do something different than what they've done to get there. And when we just lock them all up and treat them like books on a shelf in a warehouse, which is how I felt in some of the prisons I was in, you aren't really incentivizing them to change their lives.
It doesn't have to be prison inmates. It's any human being that has a dog.
Oh, that's true, too. Yeah.
Anybody that has a dog. What you're learning by being a pack leader for a dog, you're learning discipline. You're learning self-control. You're learning love.
Yes.
Love is a huge
You
one.
also get that unconditional love back.
And you get
And
a lot
sometimes inmates are difficult to love, people think.
Whew.
But a dog will love them unconditionally, and what a gift that is.
I know one felon that's extremely hard to love.
Oh, brother. Okay. So, I think it's time to move on. And our next event is to draw a card from our basket.
Okay.
I hope we get
card
something
time.
really good because
You want something
I
entertaining.
thought Time Savers was going to be hard, but we've kind of had a lot of fun with it.
Drum roll, please.
Yeah.
Daylight savings
Oh
time.
my gosh.
That's interesting that we'd have this one right after Time Savers.
Yeah.
So daylight savings time. That
Can
is
we
another
put it
whole.
back and
no,
draw another
we have to
one?
do it. We have to
I
do
don't
it.
want to do that.
No, we're gonna do it.
I saw some great
We're gonna
ones
do
in
it.
there, like
we're gonna do it, and
Patience,
everybody's
and
gonna love it.
they were so poetic, and now we're going to stuck with this thing. Okay.
It's gonna be excellent.
Daylight savings time.
Daylight savings
That
time.
is your handwriting, not mine.
Yes, but that's okay.
That
We'll do
means
well.
it's a boring topic,
No,
not
it is
poetic
not.
and beautiful
It's
like
not.
mine.
It's not. It's awesome.
Okay. All
It's
right.
awesome. So, anyway.
For entertainers 400 years ago, the best they could hope for was to be invited to the court of the king. But today, we share with billions of people around the world, and through the magic of recording technology, our message reaches people beyond our lives. We were talking about this the other day about how musicians and authors, their works live on long after they're gone. And that's pretty impactful and powerful.
But it has to be recorded work.
Yes.
So if you write a book, that's recorded. But if you sing a song or you play a lute to the king back in
well, those
400
aren't
years
recorded,
ago, those
but,
aren't recorded.
but everybody who does
today-
music today is. Right.
Today, everything's recorded.
And it
So
exists
everything that
long
they put
after.
together now, all those rap songs, those are affecting people well into the future. So
That's right. all of
300
them.
years from
So
now,
there's a
people will
bunch
be-
of people. You know what, Chris?
Yeah.
All the people I listened to when I was in high school, they're like really old people now.
All the songs that I like are from the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
And wow, that was a long time ago.
It was a long
I
time
am getting
ago.
really old, and I
Oh,
can't save
Chris.
any time for the future.
No, we can't. So at Two Doors Down, saving time is the most difficult task. We pray that one day our listeners will maximize the value of our time spent, and our time spent will maximize the value of their lives.
Share your story with us. Hashtag 2Doors Time Saver. We'd love to hear it. 2 Doors Down. Save it for next time.
Subscribe on YouTube at Two Doors Down. For exclusive content, check out our Patreon channel. Our website is twodoorsdown.com.